Alrighty, so before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land, and pay my respects to elders, both past and present. So my name's Andrew Donny, and I work in the customer success team for AHK Australien in our Sydney office, and I'll be overseeing today's event. I'd also like to give a special welcome to our platinum partners who are joining us today, both in the audience and on stage. There are a few housekeeping matters that I'd like to cover. So today's event will in fact be recorded and then uploaded on our YouTube channel, so it can be rewatched. There will be a Q&A section towards the end of our event. Questions can be answered in the chat function, or if you would like to raise your hand during the Q&A session, we do encourage that, and we hope a lot of questions do get asked. So there has been a last-minute cancellation, unfortunately, from one of our presenters, Sue Tomic from the Supply Chain and Logistics Association of Australia. But she does send her best regards. So today's event is on the current state of the supply chain disruption. The supply chain is a major area of focus for us here at the Chamber, in particular because it's an issue that affects companies across industries and of all sizes. So we hope today to offer some of the expertise from our members, as well as share some of the experiences that our members have gone through. So to start today's event, we wanted to look at a bit of a case study and how a buyer is being affected by the supply chain disruption, as it's affecting companies in a variety of different ways. So on this note, I'd like to introduce Warren Inwood, who is the Managing Director for the Crop Sciences Division of Bayer in Australia and New Zealand. If you'd like to take things away.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and welcome everybody, and yeah, very glad to be here and to be able to give you just a few, I guess, a bit of commentary around how yeah, we've been impacted by the supply chain crunch and what we're doing about that in terms of how we're managing that and going forward. So maybe just with the next slide, we can go straight ahead. So just to give you a bit of background, probably one of the biggest things, just as an overarching statement, to say, sorry, there's probably some builds in that. So if you just go to the next text slide. Yeah, thank you. You know, one of the biggest issues, I guess, just as a statement, is to say that throughout that time, from 2019 to 2022, in terms of our full year forecast for this year, the business has grown substantially, despite the fact that you know, obviously we've all faced challenges in terms of supply chain, raw material, and so forth, in terms of the logistics issues. So whilst that has been a significant disruption, the business has grown substantially in that. So I think that just needs to be put into context. And I guess one of the biggest things which we faced early on was some converging impacts and factors which have really led to a major issue in 2020. And the first and a positive change was the changing climatic conditions across Australia and New Zealand. And as you all know, at the back end of 2019, you know, we had devastating fires. We're on the back of a significant 4-year drought, which was really putting pressure on the agricultural industry, you know, across the business and across various businesses. And then early in Q1, we had a major climatic event which really changed and created a lot of immediate demand. And I guess that after that prolonged drought between 2017 and 2020, that had significant impacts on the businesses. So So in reality, a lot of businesses had reduced inventory levels at retail store level. Farmers had reduced inventory levels on farm, and that was on the prognosis of further dry conditions. So that was a real challenge. And then when we had that big climatic change, which led to a spike in demand, to be perfectly frank, no one in our industry was ready. No one had predicted a change, and all the long-term weather forecasts were continued dry weather. Obviously, that changed quite quickly in terms of the weather forecast. Had then by middle of 2020 had forecasted a La Nina event and further rain events. But obviously, with our long lead times, that was already a challenge to manage that. Then we had obviously the pandemic. We had major spikes in agricultural commodities, and that created demand where growers were wanting to increase their planting area, which naturally increased demand for products. And so it was a converging set of forces which really put pressure across our whole supply chain. Of course, everyone's had shortages of raw materials, and the agricultural sector, pharmaceutical sector is no different. So competition for raw materials, competition for freight, logistics, and manufacturing capacity all contributed to those bottlenecks, which you're all aware of. And I guess on top of that, a specific issue with Bayer is that we had a major one of our manufacturing facilities in the US, which got severely damaged in 2021 due to a hurricane. And then as an industry, we had several large manufacturing incidents, which are not necessarily Bayer related, but industry related. Several large manufacturing incidents, a couple in Asia, a couple in Europe, which led to significant disruption of raw material. So that all those converging forces. And then obviously in the start of 2022, we've had the war in Ukraine, which has created its own set of challenges, but in particularly for all the European manufacturers. Again, not just a specific Bayer statement, but all the European manufacturers really being impacted by Nord Stream 1 with significant interruptions to gas, and companies have to come up with some alternate strategies to manage that. Next slide, please. I just threw this in just to give you a visual comparison to what happened. Obviously, red is very difficult weather conditions and weather patterns, and the blue are very much improved conditions. So that's really been driving our market, and that drives agricultural production, that drives consumer sentiment in terms of purchasing behaviours and patterns. It drives production, it drives confidence, it drives output. So all those factors created a perfect storm for our customer needing a product, and all companies across our industry having difficulties getting that product to the customer in a timely fashion. And probably another factor which is in particular pertinent to agriculture is a lot of our use of our products have very specific timing, even from a registration perspective, when you can actually use our products. So timely supply of product is critically important. Next slide. Excuse me, I've got a bit of asthma at the moment, so that's a bit challenging as well. So what did we do? Well, the first thing in terms of us managing the commercial business, certainly from 2019 to 2020, the business really have changed our mindset in terms of level of risk that we're willing to take from a business standpoint. So certainly aspirational target setting has been part of the solution to having sufficient product to meet market requirements. So we've been more aspirational in the way we approach our business, taking calculated risks. We've really challenged our commercial organisation and our supply chain teams to make sure that we took the opportunity to try and be the supplier of choice based on reliability and trust on quality of product, but reliability on delivery. And that's linked somewhat to our aspirational target setting to make sure that we have enough product to meet market demand and to enable us to grow. We also took the opportunity to educate our customers. I'm sorry, I'm just going to mute myself for a bit. Apologies for that, but yeah, educating our customers around the complexities of supply chain. And that's been a real bonus in terms of our ability to do that educational programs. And again, it's not being arrogant, it's actually just using the opportunity, given that there's more understanding of those complexities, to try and educate the market on the long lead times, the challenges that all companies face in supply, and risk taking that we're all taking to meet market demand. Probably another big change to our approach is the reduction and reliance on single service contracts. So, generally the rule in procurement and supply chain was bigger contracts, single source, try and have really important relationships to deliver that business. But now risk mitigation and having more than one supplier for a raw material is key now to reliability of supply. And I guess the other thing is opportunistically, I've used air freight a lot in our business the last 3 years, and whilst it's expensive, it's allowed us to meet customer demand, to be a reliable supplier, to create that trust and make sure, whilst it's added cost to our business and taken away profitability for sure, but in terms of us being able to chase new business and to demonstrate our reliability as a partner, return on investment, there's no doubt that that's helped us a lot. And certainly buying behaviour has changed. So advanced purchases has been a strong part of the way the market's gone. And whilst we don't want to create panic, we've actually supported strategic advanced purchases where that makes sense and where we could supply and where we can lock in business. Next slide, please. Probably in terms of what we've done, specific actions locally and globally, as I said, one thing which we've got a manufacturing facility in Brisbane. We've expanded the footprint of that plant, expanded in capacity, expanded in efficiency gains for our manufacturing plant. And I think that nearshoring, that bringing more control into your local market has enabled us to chase business. It's enabled us to have product in a timely fashion and to reduce that time lag between our ability to react to opportunities. I mentioned we moved away from single source contracts. We've also had a strong cultural project within the Bayer business, but also on our manufacturing site around how do we lower decision making to lower levels in the organisation? How do we create an environment where they feel empowered, how they can be involved in the purpose of what we're doing? And obviously, during COVID, that was very important, that they understood that food security was a very emotional topic at that time, and the fact that we could keep our manufacturing facilities going, and that was for the cause to try and support the Australian farmer, the Australian grower, supplying his needs to make sure that he can supply the output, which ultimately is feeding Australia, feeding Asia. So that, I think that resonated with the employees to make sure that we could keep them on site and motivated to work and to cater for that increased demand. Because again, I will reiterate, largely it was unforecasted demand, and so the supply chain teams did a marvelous job in terms of reacting to that. We also have tried to move commercially. There's obviously also some commercial tactics where we've tried to move the market into larger pack options. The throughput which we can get through our manufacturing facility on larger packs over smaller volume packs is obviously greater. We can put more throughput through the plant, and we argued that yeah, there's cost benefits in that for the grower as well. So we've tried to move the market into larger packs. Globally, we've certainly been very much focused on the commercial organisations around the world, but in particular in Australia, to again be aspirational in our 3-year rolling forecast. We've spent a lot more time on doing even the outer years on the forecasting to ensure that we're future-proofing those volumes in the outer years, not just in the immediate future. Globally, we've installed mobile generators, oil-based mobile generators, to replace the reliance on Nord Stream 1. And we've been able to do that in 6 months, where we've been able to switch from relying 90% on gas to almost 90% now on these mobile generators. So it's been a magnificent job, and we've been able to keep most of our manufacturing in Europe going at almost 100% capacity, which again is fantastic. There's various supply agility projects underway, just trying to look at some efficiency gains, and most definitely we're carrying more safety stock in country at Australia and New Zealand level. We also have a centralised safety stock approach now in APAC, so that our APAC team can divert product into markets where needed, and where we can react to positive consumer demand. And that's probably it from my side, Andrew. As a quick, I think that was my last slide, just to check.
I think it was, yes.
Yeah, and again, apologies for all the coughing, but
no, not at all.
From it was. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. There's some very interesting points. In particular, I'm interested to hear maybe in the Q&A section a little bit more about, the flow-on effects of what the increase in needing warehousing space, what that has for the industry as a whole. So I'd like to now introduce our industry expert to our virtual stage. So Anthony Burns is the Chief Executive Officer of Henning Harders. He's a licensed customs broker and certified specialist in supply chain solutions, and has over 30 years of experience. And so he's going to give us the perspective of a freight forwarder, and then we'll move on to the Q&A section of the event. And I again would encourage everyone to write in their questions, or if you'd like at the time, raise your hand. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Warren. So I'll just pull up my screen here. Andrew, thumbs up if you can see that. Yeah, no. It's interesting. No, okay, that's interesting. Let me try again. Still not showing.
Should we pull it up on our end?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
If you could, Sonia. Excellent.
Okay, that's terrific. All right. First of all, look, thank you. I was really happy to be invited, so we can give a perspective on the freight forwarder and what we are, how we're participating, and just for terminology purposes, when we're talking to the German Chamber, we often talk about an enabling industry. And enabling industry is someone like a freight forwarder like us. So I'll get into a little bit about what freight forwarding is more about than maybe everybody understands. If I could just go to the next slide. So these are the discussion points I wanted to cover. I think just first of all, in context, so you understand about us and the attachment with this community. We are a 35-year-old Australian-owned family business with strong German heritage. Henning was our founder. And we're in Australia and New Zealand. We have 5 offices here in Australia in all the capitals and 2 offices in New Zealand. We have 140 people across the two countries. And we actually have the 3rd generation. So we're a multi-generational family business, and the 3rd generation is working inside the business and have management roles now. We work with global partners. So once I talk about Australia and New Zealand, yes, we work with global partners all around the world with similar structure and values and ethics to us, and standards as of what we do with our customers. Structurally, to understand a freight forwarder like us, we have key account management, where these are the specialists working with our customers like yourselves. We do freight forwarding, customs brokerage, transport. We have an advisory division helping with various technical things other than customs. We do contract logistics, and we actually have our own training academy, which is important when, for example, educating customers, what Warren was talking about. So we employ specialists. As a freight forwarder, if people have a perception of a freight forwarder just to make bookings and organise trucking, it's a little bit more than that. So we employ specialists because this was quite evident during the disruptions and the shipping crisis, where these are levers we could pull, and these are people that we can rely on to educate our people, to educate our customers and find solutions. Key markets for us are Europe and Asia and USA, Trans-Tas, of course. Industry we work in is chemicals, pharmaceutical, consumer care, food and beverage, agriculture, automotive, machinery, and building products. So that just gives you a snapshot of Henning Harders, and hopefully that validates why we have certain opinions and recommendations that we might talk about today. So the rest of the points I'll get into. So maybe we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about how freight forwarders were dealing with disruption. In a nutshell, when the freight forwarder, if it's done well, they support the supply chain professionals or managers in executing adjustments and being able to be nimble and find solutions along the way. When the freight forwarder knows your business and they know the market, and they know what levers to pull, and they have the right carrier relationships, you've got a good partner. So this is when we talk about enabling industries. These are partners that help you with insights and executing your logistics, so you don't have to do that yourself. And you've got, just certainly over the last couple of years, importers and exporters have had a lot to deal with, and they've needed to have a partner that can shoulder the load with them. As long as you've got a good partner, they can tap into a lot of resources to help. So what were we doing during disruptions? Certainly we're gathering a lot of global market intelligence on disruptions and shipping companies. We're educating staff, we're educating our partners, our customers, and working through the impacts on customers. So in the middle of a crisis, if you can imagine, we've got a team that's looking at the intel and what's going on, keeping abreast of that and getting communication out to our partners, our customers. We've got a team that's looking at the impact of the shipments that are on water or just about to be on water, and we've got people looking at what's coming, what's pending bookings, so that we talk to customers and make sure that they understand that this is going to be impacted. This may happen, you've got an option to do this. And I know for Warren's example, there was a shift to air freight, which was quite common at that time. Of course, there was also some demands around air freight space because passenger aircraft weren't flying at that time. So that was another, other than shipping lines, that was another complex piece to navigate around. A big thing that we needed to deal with at the time was keeping our people, right? I know that's the same for all of you. Everybody had a problem with keeping their people. Supply chain was a difficult time, and by rallying together with our customers and our teams, if you retained people at that time, you actually came through it okay. Something else that we were doing in the moment, we understood that shipping companies were very reluctant to offer any relief on container detention charges. So we have to stay close there and try and find favourable detention arrangements for customers, and wherever that is, and present to them, present to the shipping lines where a customer has a certain need and they're a long-term supporter. We can present and go to bat and do some negotiations where possible. Now, of course, when I said there was reluctance, that was a hard no in a lot of cases. That's starting to come back around now as congestion and equipment ends up in its right location, but it's ongoing. Another thing a freight forwarder is doing, or what we're doing in the time of a crisis, is managing well landside operations. So if we, prior to a disruption, if we have matched a transport model to a customer's needs very well, we're managing port operations, deliveries, and container returns. There's a lot, each of those things had its own issues along the last couple of years, and at different times it still does. So if we have the right models and we can manage that for our customers with night runs and out of hours deliveries and options, the outcome of that is to reduce cost, keep the flow, and get your inventory GR'd at your warehouse. So next slide. So the other thing is in reverse, is working with customers to understand their decision making that may actually impact logistics where they're not realizing that may happen. So when we've got disruption and we've got shipping issues, we start to work with customers about maybe possibly avoiding bulk production, causing bunching and additional costs. There could be some bottlenecks in production staging. If the capacity of shipping lines at those times couldn't meet the bottlenecks, the production, then those costs and bottlenecks and impact to production were happening. So we found it necessary to start talking to customers, what's coming up, what decision making are you doing, so that, because if you do this, this may happen. This particular market is experiencing this right now. So that's something that's happened. It's starting to ease now, of course, but that in the moment, that was something we jumped onto with our customers. The other thing is, the next thing is to never assume that our customers are understanding some of the origin disruptions. These are typical. If you've got a China with Golden Week, Chinese New Year, everybody knows it happens, but we never assume that, because we start to work with, this is coming up, what are you doing about it? Are you aware? And you know, quite often the response is, oh no, we haven't got onto that yet, and our planning hasn't accounted for it, because some of these dates move around from year to year. So that's something we do often, and maybe something you're not aware that freight forwarders start to think about. One of the next thing that we do regularly, and we ramped this up during the last couple of years, was some innovation. Innovation because we needed to get information flow better. We needed to get scalability of processes automated, so that we could dedicate our resources to more valued tasks, because it was, you know, 5 times harder to book a vessel. So rather than just add resources on, we started to innovate. businesses can get a little bit carried away with the innovation, I must say. We as a business have chosen to innovate for the purpose of scalability and information flow and the demand on our IT resources, but we can never move away from the human relationship, because what we do know is that how we've structured business to work with customers and the value of what we do is don't ever detract from the needs of the importer and exporter, and you always help with the supply chain decision making at critical times. So my comment here is this is a real balance that what we do when we talk about innovation and digital initiatives. So next one. So when we were doing the preparation for this session, what we thought about is what are the things that we could suggest with having no knowledge of all of your businesses that you may be looking at, but you also may not be at the moment. So this is a little bit of a whiteboarding, throw some considerations, and if they land well with you to think about that, that's great. And actually Warren mentioned some target setting there, and that sort of ties in a little bit as well. We found that a lot of businesses were doing their planning as a reaction to the global shipping crisis. What we notice now is some of them unsure how to go back. So we remind people to review your forward planning again. If it's, look at your 12-month regular shipment, avoid these bulk issues, get something that is nice and smooth, remove your peaks, because then you remove your risk of having a lot of inventory that is impacted by any disruptions. When I keep talking about disruptions, they will keep happening. So with your inventory strategy, Warren mentioned the Bayer example, where they need to respond very quickly to customer demand, and so they hold inventory. And they've got a particular strategy around that, because that's the reliability and that's the trust and that's the brand reputation of Bayer, of course. But then you've got other businesses that have simply moved around between decision making and this just in case, just in time version, which is popping up now. And but having a think, when we'd like people to consider, if you were buying early or just fear buying for shipping uncertainty, have a think about that, talk with your freight forwarder, understand if that's still topical for you right now, and do you have to keep going the way you've been going. I would say work closely with your suppliers and understand the production plan mirrors the achievable shipping plan. This is somewhat related to different markets, what's going on at the time, but be very information flow and intel around what you can actually achieve will help with you when you're talking with your production. So in brief there, if we have a well-planned, regular, smooth volumes are achieved, that allows for smaller impact to disruptions. That's somewhat my takeaway there. Involve the stakeholders that execute your logistics, and start to think about your planning. So the next one is a topic around. Oh, sorry, one more on that slide. Transit times, and we often talk to our partners, and they have built in to their ERP specific transit times, and then the pressure comes from trying to meet those. And of course, where the reliability of that pre-COVID, we could make those workable. During the shipping of the last couple of years, that somewhat has been thrown out the window in many cases. So what I'd suggest there is production might be impacted by some uncertain transit times. Your schedule reliability will continue to be impacted. A couple of examples here on origin and destination disruptions, just so you're in tune with what's current right now. China still have pre-COVID policies impacting manufacturing. There's still port congestion in the USA. It seems to flick between the West Coast to the East Coast and back and forth. They have trucking and there's rail strikes, and Germany and UK have been experiencing port strikes. Port operations in Ningbo have been affected by COVID. Port emissions will still be a relevant thing as shipping companies try to recover schedules. For example, if Ningbo is emitted, or there's congestion and they bring it back on, they need to recover the schedule somehow. And even right now, we're avoiding weather in the Asian typhoons. Another thing that is happening, and it continues to happen, and I have an expectation that this will continue still, are blank sailings on some of the trades. So if you're not tuned to what this is, in brief, what's happening is demand is dropped and the carriers are trying to create some artificial demand by a blank sailing. And there's a couple of impacts that happen there. Rates don't go right through the floor. They can recover, and this will continue. We ran some small statistics, and there was on a particular trade globally, there was 725 sailings. 64 of these were cancelled over a period. So this is still ongoing. Coming into Asia right now, down to Australia, we probably expect this in the next period. So the next slide. Something else we want to recommend people to think about when they're preparing going forward is maybe just an understanding on the market that the trade that you're operating in, and what the shipping companies are going to react well to. So it plays out, or the sweet spot for a carrier, or where that plays well, is where they have stable, regular, weekly committed volumes, right? So if you've got enough volume and your volume is going to translate to something attractive to a carrier, or you're doing this via your forwarder where there's a combined volume, this is what we as forwarders are trying to achieve with carriers. And a particular topical one for this group is Europe to Australia. So we were in Europe in the last couple of weeks and meeting with the major shipping lines with a common discussion around the Europe to Australia is somewhat a niche market, a niche trade for the carriers. They like this market. Of course, there's some variables around equipment for reefers and things like that. But in essence, why it's a niche market is because historically, Europe to Australia runs around 850,000 TEU in a year. It's peaked over 1 million TEU for the carriers on this trade in the last 2 years. And their expectation is in this current 2022 year, it'll return to the 2019 volumes. And that will return also the predicted 4% year-on-year growth in this trade. So if they talk about a niche market, you watch these world indices and a lot of the commentary around prices dropping through the floor. But in this particular market, the rates are somewhat less influenced. So in your market, just think about what the carriers are trying to achieve. Another one for you is just to really be in touch with your service choice with different carrier lines. So you've got, out of Europe, for example, you've got direct services and transshipment services. If you're not really understanding what that means to you in your decision making, I'd get some dialogue going with your freight forwarder so that you can assess what is the best need for your supply chain. Where you've got a direct service, it's consistent. The carriers respond really well to capacity. If there's growth, they add, for example, on one of the services, they've added a 15th sailing, and that will continue on in the future. Transshipment services in the moment could be quite attractive, but just be aware that maybe not always they're going to suit your supply chain. I'll leave it there, but just be aware to look at that. And my big advice here is just to partner with an enabling industry provider that has specific specialty capabilities around your business and your trade. They will help you manage with insights and your decision making for your supply chain to help you avoid some of the things in that may pop up and continue to pop up in the future. Andrew, how am I going for time? Yep, okay. When we were doing the preparation for this session, we talked about some nearshoring. So sourcing decisions are something that you are talking about with inside your business, but I just wanted to add a couple of topics that may not be something you'll typically or normally talk about inside your meeting rooms, that you could reach out to your forwarder to get their help or their insights on while you're assessing, not after you've made the decision, but while you're assessing. So a good one there is shipping constraints and the volatility between markets. For a quick example, if you were moving your production from Europe to Asia, you're going from stable to volatile. You want to make sure your sourcing decisions are supported by shipping services. We can mostly assume that they will be, but it may not always be. When you're looking at a chain in source, really get the insights and the intel from your freight forwarder. Have them give you some commentary around the capacity in that market and the lead times that you can expect. You can look at a lot of that up on web services, but you're better off getting a good rounded opinion from your freight forwarder. It could be that you get an advantage for BMSB that you hadn't thought about. The freight forwarder can help you with country specifics. If there's some government regulations, export license, some rules and regulations to consider, there's a lot of intel that can be gained. My big one is free trade agreements. So you may actually get an advantage, or you may lose an advantage by moving your sourcing. So always ask that question. And the other one would be dumping duties. If you haven't heard of those, so this is where there's a certain market that will dump product into another market, and you're unaware until you talk with your forwarder and say, okay, I'm moving this product from this source to another one. What is it I need to consider? There'll be a nice, well-rounded inquiry around just all sort of risks there. Import permits for biosecurity. It's not safe to assume that will carry forward from one source to another. It could be that needs to be reapplied. There's a process, there's a period that needs to happen, or it could be that the new source or the new origin will have a different requirement that you hadn't considered before. Modern slavery, I'll just touch on. You might be lucky and have your freight forwarder have some experience around what they're doing in certain origins. I've put in there SEDEX, which is something we do across in China, across multiple sites to make sure that we are compliant. And definitely something that is always relevant, particularly around a group like this, is anti-corruption risk. So if you're moving to certain countries, you may find that there's some cross-border issues that happen that are not visible, and we should make people aware of those things, because that's the ones that come back and bite us later. The next one there. This is one I just wanted people to be aware of, because if it hasn't had enough press, which I don't think it has, I just wanted to give it some airplay and bring it into some relevance. There is a government review going on with Australian Maritime Logistics, and why that's important to a group like this is that these are the fees that keep rising, and there's no avenue to negotiate them. And I'll explain why that is in a moment. And this has caught the attention of the Australian Productivity Commission. It's happening right now. There's a meeting, I think, later this week or next week to go to the next step of the inquiry. But these are the things that you may not be. You're always looking at transport pricing and ocean carriage rates, but these ones over time have just kept going and going and going. And sometimes the periods are very small. They happen a few times a year. So why that happens is you've got fees and charges that form part of the shipping line contracts with stevedores, and there's other fees and charges that are outside of those contracts that are billed through to the users, like transport companies, and they get passed through to you. So the Australian Productivity Commission has got hold of that. They're looking for a review to see if there's any government action that's required or potential regulation. And I've listed the topics there so you're aware. This is something to look out for and keep an ear to. Shipping competition review is the first one. Minimum service levels and notification periods with stevedores. Infrastructure investment, and this is where this carries on into fees because these need to be validated. Regulation of terminal access charges, they believe is probably going to be an outcome. Regulation of container detention practices, which is an interesting one because all the shipping companies apply a different methodology. And then the implementation of biosecurity reform priorities, because this is also a barrier and a delay that happens at the border that needs some attention. So I just wanted to put that in there just so people are aware, and they're starting to gain some insights into that. So that's Andrew. That's all of my discussion points. Back over to you, I think.
Excellent. I guess my sort of largest takeaway from that is communication and speaking to your freight forwarder. So hopefully as one sort of takeaway, we can use that as one. So now we would move on to our Q&A section of the event. And once again, I would encourage you to put up your hand if you do have any questions. Now, we did receive one question via the chat function, just in case anyone hasn't been able to actually read it. I might just ask that again to you, Warren. So what role has technology played within the integrated business planning process for Bayer?
Yeah. Can you hear me,
Yep.
Andrew? Yep. So certainly we've got quite a few tools which we're currently using, and for those that don't know, obviously Bayer is a combination of quite a few different companies, and we made one large acquisition about 4 years ago. So we're trying to integrate the business forecasting and tools at the moment, but certainly, yeah, we have a very detailed integrated planning from a technology standpoint. But on top of that, probably more looking forward or forward-looking, certainly there's a lot of effort going into statistical forecasting, especially on the longer term view, sort of in the 12 to 48 month time horizon, where we've built some algorithms to actually do a lot of that forecasting for active ingredient, but also raw materials away from the business, and we focus on the short-term forecasting. So we'll have to see how that goes, but certainly from that perspective, looking for that next level of efficiency gains in that forecasting process.
Absolutely. Now, if there's no questions at this point in time, I might put it to you, Anthony. How do you see technology being able to enable businesses to adapt to this sort of changing environment?
So there are advancements going on. For us internally, there's a couple of key elements here. The first one is scalability. There are ways to capture information, data. We've applied some innovation around AI on certain functionalities of our business, and then trying to match that capability through to our customer needs. Information flow is critical. What we're preferring to do now is there's a very old school idea around looking up statuses. This is not where we want to be. So the visibility and there's a lot of tools, and there's a lot of functionality around logging on somewhere and having a look. But we have to recognize that if we can get that data into the hands or into the ERP system of our customers for all of their business and the people that are interested to see the updates and the variations to the plan or the expected milestones, that's where the innovation is going to hit its mark. So that's where we're working right now.
I'm pretty excited to hear about that, Anthony, because that's probably in the last 3 years, that's been probably the single biggest point of conflict between us and our retail customer base and the grower, is around communicating when product would be available.
Yep.
And it was a constant conversation almost on a daily basis, and having that transparency and not, as you say, if we didn't have to go looking for it and it was just pushed to us, I think that would have a major impact in terms of your customer service level and ease of business to do with you as a business partner.
Yeah, there's two comments I would have there. Is the first one is about mindset. If we approach it from our side of the partnership only, we will miss the mark. That achieves a lot. It's a great sales tool. We can show all the bells and whistles, right? But we've ignored the need of the user. And the first part of that is identifying all the people, all the users that it needs to hit. The second part of that is not to ignore, is if there's a variation that our people also need to know, right? At the same time as a demand planner or whoever inside a customer's business, because the next piece of dialogue is, what do we do? And it's great to have the information, but that's the next piece. What do we do next? That's where I want to start putting the lens, or we have been putting the lens on.
Absolutely. Maybe just as a follow-up to that, before we get to another audience question, can you highlight any sort of emerging technologies that's coming out and companies can employ?
From my side of it, most of it's around our own development in the AI space, okay. Right? What we need to do is be very fast to capture accurate information. We had a lot of capability around interfacing, but this is now a little bit old as well, and a lot of our customers actually don't have the resources to do this. So we needed to find a better way that we can roll out to more people, and that's what we're undertaking at the moment, is to how do we do this better so that we can capture and then start to take away a lot of the manual work. The visibility of tools is something. Now, I did say that I wanted to. We have a lens on putting data into the hands of the people that need it, but there is still a need for good, accurate visibility tools. So we won't ignore that, and that's under development right now. There is some solutions out there, but it's not holistic enough for us.
Yeah. Now, I'll make this next one a sort of two-pronged question. So we've had one question in the last 2 years. On average, how much has freight actually increased in terms of air and sea freight? But then also, when's the sort of prediction that reliability of shipments, particularly to Europe, will go back to sort of pre-COVID levels?
Okay, so reliability. So we talk, rates. They, in some markets they were 4 and 6 times higher, and this was driven by demand and capacity of the market. Capacity is just not availability of containers, availability of ships. It's quite often related to shipping reliability. For an example, if I've got one service that runs weekly out of the USA to Australia, there's 52 schedules a year. In the last year, they ran 36 of those 52. So if you can imagine, that capacity is reduced by that number of sailings, and there's backlog all the way through that shipping. And then there's a period where they need to recover. Where the capacity is low, the demand's high, obviously the rates, that's with the opportunistic time where the carriers are charging the higher rates. In talking to the carriers, we now talk about hope. So they're very hopeful that disruptions will be less, right? Not disappearing, but less. and they've deployed every available ship into the market. There's new vessels on the order books and start rolling out. I think it's at the end of this year onto it in the next couple of years. So ship builds, but we have to not ignore that some of the vessels deployed are not fit for service, so they will come off deployment. Capacity will go up because of reliability will come up, less disruption over time. This is the hope of the shipping companies, and therefore some level of reliability starts to return.
Now, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but can you give a ballpark figure of when you think that might return?
No, in a nutshell.
Fair enough.
So, and I think if you, in asking the shipping companies the same question, it all relates back to all of the triggers that have to, over time, enter the market. So capacity is starting to align with demand. A prediction of when that is, no, I don't think that's. I don't think anybody will be able to answer that.
Would it be fair to say, though, Anthony, that container costs, in particular from Asia, is coming down quite rapidly? So
absolutely. So right now, there's a couple of things in Asia that are happening, particularly China. So the pre-Golden Week influx didn't happen. Manufacturing has been impacted. From what I can see, I'd imagine that there's some reluctance for some industries dealing with China. That's not validated in any way. But what's happening is that peak didn't happen. And therefore, is it going to happen on the back of Golden Week? It's unlikely, and we're not seeing that. So what's happening is we've got capacity, and the shipping companies are trying to attract volume.
Yeah.
So how do they do that? They work on rates. The other thing that's happening, we've got a couple of disruptors in that China market at the moment that people should be aware of. We've got new entrants into that market, and the most interesting one has created a lot of disruption, yet it's only very short term. So there's a new service. There's a business that has wants to operate between Australia and New Zealand on very small vessels, around 1,500 TEU. What they need is equipment. So they've gone out to market and given a deal around equipment out of Ningbo to Sydney, very, very low, to move this equipment to Australia to service that trans-Tasman market, right? So this is a very short window, but it's really disrupted the rates. So the rates have really come off. And to be honest with you, we're working on this every week at the moment, during the week to understand, because we have to be abreast of getting those rates in front of our customer, so that they're getting the right deal.
Yeah,
of course. Now, just one more question as well. It asks, how can we control detention charges when we have no control over these and importers have to wear the costs? And they just get passed on through to them.
This is actually a subject for the government review also, right? Operationally, we try to manage, when we've got volume, we try to manage that through so we can get those containers returned. If there's been incidents when the empty container park's full and the shipping company is still charging detention on those containers, even though we can't return them. So managing it well, my comments earlier about, somewhat related to, let's try and smooth this. So if you've got a lot of containers arriving at once, or you end up with bunching of vessels for a customer that from different sources that arrive at once, we have to work with the DC on how do we increase the throughput. So we will start working with the customer's DC to work weekends, nights, receivables. We might suggest to strip the containers out, get the returns, and deliver them loose. So there are many things to look at, but the key there is to be very active, right? Don't just leave it one for one and have the DC dictate when they're going to receive the containers, because they just don't have an insights on what the timeline looks like and the impact to the cost. So we have to really work, get all the stakeholders together to do that. Now, the detention practices somewhat, the carriers have benefited, honestly, and they because they are, over the last couple of years, trying to get their equipment back because they have equipment shortages somewhere else. They're trying to move those into other markets. So they don't want to encourage people to hang on to equipment, so therefore they won't give extended days. But now there is, I'll be very interested to see the outcome of the inquiry with the Australian Productivity Commission. This is a topic that they are looking at.
Maybe the topic of another webinar for us.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, it does look as if we've reached the end of the event, or we've reached the time limit. So I'd like to thank both Anthony and Warren for speaking for us today, and everyone who was able to attend today. There are some contact details up on screen. Hopefully we can continue this conversation, and of course we encourage you all to reach out. And so with that said, I'd like to thank you all again for coming, and we hope to continue this conversation into the new year, and hopefully conditions will improve as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anthony. And thanks to everyone who joined. See you.
Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure.